Hello, my name is John and I'm here to show you how easy it is to brew your own beer. Homebrewed beer is a very rewarding hobby, as you can well imagine. The results of your labor are easy to enjoy and taste much better when you know you've brewed it yourself. A little bit of history: I've never really liked beer. I turned of age and had my first beer and thought, I don't know what all the hubbub is about, but this stuff is terrible. So I wasn't a beer drinker until I believe it was the Boston Brewing Company, the first microbrew that I can remember anyway, came into business, and their offering was a Boston lager. And after my first Boston lager, I was hooked on craft brews. Once I started trying different craft brews, someone said to me one day, well, why don't you brew your own? And that's where my journey began. I got on Craigslist. I found a used brewing kit that included almost everything I needed. It had been lightly used. I paid, I think, $50 for the kit, which I thought was pretty good at the time. It came with some empty beer bottles, so I was ready to brew. I looked in the phone book and I found a local company, homebrew supply, homebrew and winemaking supply, and started buying kits there and trying different ones. You can get the kits locally, or you can get the beer kits. There are several companies that sell them online, delivered right to your door. They're very easy to do, and that's what we're going to find out today, how easy it actually is. What I have here, we're not actually going to do the brewing process today because it does take a couple of hours to actually brew. And what you're going to get is a kit that looks like this. This is a honey wheat ale, Brewmaster Select kit. It comes with dried malt extract, and there are two different kinds. You can do liquid malt extract or dried malt extract. I prefer the dried. I've tried both. I do prefer the dried malt. And these kits come with they're called a partial mash. They include some cracked grains in a muslin bag. You put the grains in a muslin bag and you brew that with the dried malt extract in combination. It gives the beer a little more, I think, body, a little more taste, a little flavor. This honey wheat ale, this actually comes with a pound of honey, wildflower honey, that you will brew with the beer. You actually boil it with the beer. You'll need just a few tools. It doesn't take anything really, no special tools, no special skills, and that's what makes it so enjoyable. I absconded my wife's, don't tell her, stew pot, stainless steel, 5 gallons. It's perfect for brewing beer. I fill it with 3 gallons of water. I add the dried malt extract and I stir it up. I turn the heat on low. It warms the water, helps the dried malt extract to dissolve completely. You don't want any lumps, you want it dissolved completely. I put the cracked grains in a muslin bag and drop that in there and start to heat the water on the stove. Now, gas stoves, they heat naturally. They heat the water a little quicker. But I have an electric stove at home, and that works just fine. You bring the water up to temperature, and at the beginning point, when it begins to boil, you pull the grain bag out. You don't want to spoil the grain. You don't want to burn them, scorch them, singe them. And the same holds true for the wort. You don't want to singe the wort. You want to keep the heat even. You don't want to bring it to a boil too fast. But just as it breaks the boil, begins to boil, you take the grain bag out and set it aside, and you bring the wort, as it's called now, to a boil. And you're going to boil it for 1 hour. at about 50 minutes, 45 to 50 minutes, and there's no set times for these. It's a very forgiving hobby. You don't have to have a timer, although it helps. But if you don't put the ingredients in at the exact time that it says on the instructions, and each kit comes with instructions, by the way. It takes you through the entire process from beginning, adding the water, to end, putting it in the fermenting bucket to ferment it. Tells you temperature, fermentation temperature. It tells you when to add the hops, the finishing hops, and the bittering hops. But anyway, you're gonna bring your wort, as it's called, to a boil, and you're going to boil it for 1 hour. At about the 50-minute mark, 45 to 50 minutes, you're going to add what's called bittering hops, and that takes the wort is very sweet. The dried malt extract is high in sugar content, and that's what's going to cause the yeast, when we get to that point, to ferment. And the yeast eats the sugars and turns them to alcohol, releases CO2. But that's later on. At about the 50-minute point, you're going to add your bittering hops. And I use a little T-ball, okay, a little T-ball here. And I put my bittering hops in the T-ball and drop it right into the wort as it's boiling. And you're going to boil those for 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, depending on when you dropped them in there. Then you're going to add at 5 minutes before the end of the boil, or 55 minutes, you'll put some finishing hops in. And depending on the style of the beer is the type of hops. And there are so many different kind of hops that I won't even begin to tell you about them here. But each one has their own bittering units. Some are very bitter, some are not so bitter. Some impart a hop flavor, different hop flavors. But anyway, you're going to boil that. When you get down to the end, you will have 3 gallons of wort. You're going to put it in your kitchen sink and surround it with cold water and ice. The goal here is to cool it down as quickly as possible to a temperature that is suitable for the yeast to begin working. So, which is usually around 70 to 75 or 6 degrees. I've pitched yeast as hot as 78 degrees and had good luck with that. But that's the goal, to get it to 60 to 70 degrees. Okay, so you keep it. It's going to take 35 to 45 minutes of running cold water around a pot. Adding ice, keep the pot covered. There's you want to keep out wild yeast. While there are still some beers today that are brewed, it's called open fermentation. It's not preferred. It's not a very controllable way to ferment beer, and wild yeast can impart off flavors, which, some beers have off flavors. That's what makes them special beers. But we don't want to do that. Okay, we want to control the wild yeast from getting into the wort until we pitch the proper yeast in for the style of beer. And again, there's many different yeasts for the different types of beer. When you get the wort cooled down to a yeast pitching temperature, you'll pour it into a fermentation bucket, which is a simple plastic bucket, holds 6 gallons. It looks like this. Okay, has a cover with a lid, cover with a hole in the lid, this hole right here, and that hole is going to hold the airlock. The airlock has a rubber stopper in the bottom. Okay. And that rubber stopper fits right in the hole. Okay, so it's going to look like this. Okay, all right. And the fermentation bucket is nothing more than just a plastic bucket. It's got a spout on it. These are relatively inexpensive. They're like $13 or $14. I've got an extra thermometer on here that for when I ferment, I can I can monitor the temperature. But you're going to put the fermentation bucket on the floor and pour your now cooled wort from a height, not so that you splash it all over and make a huge mess, because it is very sweet, and being sweet, it's sticky, very sticky. And your wife will not like it if you make that sticky mess all over her kitchen. You will clean it, I'll guarantee it. Anyway, pour your now cooled wort from a height of 1 or 2 feet, and what that's going to do is aerate it, and yeast likes oxygen. And by pouring it from a little height, you will add oxygen just in the process of pouring it from a height. Anyway, you get your 3 gallons of wort poured in. Add an additional 2 gallons of cold water. That brings the total volume to 5 gallons. This batch you're going to make 5 gallons of beer, which is about 2.5 cases of bottles. Then you pitch your yeast. Now you can buy yeast either liquid or dry. Dry, you just open the packet, sprinkle it on the top. You snap your lid on the fermentation bucket. You add a little bit of water to the airlock so that no air gets in and only CO2 escapes during the fermentation process. Or you pitch your liquid yeast and snap the cover on. It's the same thing, only one's liquid, one's dry. Snap your cover on, and your wort will begin to become beer as the yeast eats the sugar in the wort and converts it to alcohol. CO2 will be released and come through the airlock, and the airlock will bubble through the water. And in about 2 or 3 days, the bubbling will stop. At that point, you have beer. You want to bottle that beer, or you can keg it. Kegging is very easy. I have some old soda kegs that I've purchased from Coca-Cola Company or the Pepsi-Cola bottling company. They're 2 different types of fittings on top. That's how you can tell the 2 apart. But they each hold 5 gallons. And you can pour the beer into, you're going to add what's called priming sugar. And it's a cup of sugar that the yeast is going to continue to work. And once the beer is sealed, the yeast will go to work again on eating the sugar, the priming sugar, and that will carbonate the beer. I don't like a lot of carbonation, so I don't add the full cup of sugar. I usually add anywhere from 3/4 to 7/8 of a cup of sugar, priming sugar for the fermentation process. And the beer will take approximately 2 weeks, if you can wait that long. Sometimes about 5 days. You can, if you bottled it, 5 days into the conditioning or carbonation process, you can go down and you can pop the cap on one of those and begin to enjoy the fruits of your labor. It's much better if you wait the 2 weeks. Some beers, the longer you wait, the better they are. The more conditioned they become, the flavors meld together. I brew a Christmas beer, which is very, very good, and it has sour orange peel and cinnamon and nutmeg. And the longer you let that set, the better it is. But I'm telling you what, it's real good. If you brew it in November, come Christmas, it's a real good treat. Anyway, that's all it takes to brew beer. It's hard to imagine that it's that easy, but it is. It's a wonderful hobby, one to enjoy. I certainly do. And I hope that some of you may wish to try it on your own. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't take any expensive tools, any expensive equipment. It doesn't take any specialized training. You can look on the internet and find tons of videos on YouTube on how to brew your own beer, and they'll take you through the process step by step, some even through the bottling process. But enjoy.